Welcome to the weekly market recap with Sampath Securities. Let's take a look at some of the latest developments in the Sri Lankan economy and financial markets. Finance and Planning Deputy Minister says Sri Lanka is expected to receive the combined 5th and 6th tranches of the International Monetary Fund's Extended Fund Facility Program by the end of May. Speaking in Parliament, the Deputy Minister said the country expects an inflow of around $700 million to help manage the trade balance and support broader economic stability. He also stated that the Asian Development Bank has increased its planned budget support for 2026 to $480 million. This includes an additional $100 million aimed at easing the impact of global economic pressure. In addition, the World Bank Group and affiliated institutions are expected to provide a combined $200 million through development and structural reform programs. The Deputy Minister explained that the recent depreciation of the Sri Lankan rupee was mainly driven by the strengthening US dollar and rising global oil prices linked to the Middle East conflict. However, he noted that the central bank data shows the rupee's depreciation remains moderate compared to several other regional currencies facing similar external pressure. He further stated that Sri Lanka continues to follow a flexible exchange rate policy, allowing the currency to respond to market conditions. According to the Deputy Minister, a weaker rupee could support exports by making local goods cheaper for foreign buyers, while also reducing import demand by increasing the cost of foreign goods. The government also announced several relief measures to ease the burden of rising energy costs and global uncertainty. These include a 60 billion rupee allocation for fuel subsidies, offering concessions of up to 100 rupees per litre of diesel and 20 rupees per litre of petrol. An additional 15 billion rupees has been allocated for electricity subsidies targeting domestic users consuming less than 108 units. Support measures for the fishing sector include monthly fuel allowances and direct fuel subsidies for both standard and multi-day fishing vessels. Meanwhile, fertiliser prices for paddy cultivation have been capped at 10,200 rupees per bag, while subsidy payments for paddy and other crops have also been increased. The government has additionally expanded the Aswasuma welfare allowance with higher payments for eligible beneficiaries. To support foreign exchange reserves and manage the trade balance, Sri Lanka has also imposed a temporary 50% surcharge on customs import duties for most personal vehicles for a 3-month period beginning May 16, 2026. Sri Lanka's economy recorded mixed performance across key sectors during the week ending May 15, according to the latest weekly economic indicators released by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. The report showed improvements in industrial activity, while tourism earnings and several financial market indicators recorded declines. In the real sector, tea production declined during the January to March 2026 period compared to the same period last year. The decline was mainly attributed to lower output in March due to extreme dry weather conditions. Rubber production also recorded a year-on-year decrease during the same period. However, industrial activity shows signs of recovery. The index of industrial production increased by 3% in March 2026 to 106.9 compared to March 2025. The growth was mainly supported by high production in the clothing manufacturing sector, which expanded by 13.8%. Production of other non-metallic mineral products also increased significantly, recording a growth of 16.6%. Meanwhile, the Purchasing Managers' Indices for April 2026 indicated contractions in both manufacturing and services activities, signaling slower business conditions. The report also highlighted volatility in global oil prices during the review period. This was linked to supply disruptions and geopolitical tensions following the collapse of US-Iran peace negotiations and attacks on ships in the Strait of Hormuz. By the end of the review period, Brent crude oil prices had increased by $5.66 per barrel, while WTI crude oil prices rose by $6.79 per barrel compared to the previous week. In the monetary sector, the weekly average weighted prime lending rate declined by 8 basis points to 9.71% for the week ending May 15. At the same time, the average weighted call money rate increased slightly to 7.79% from 7.76% recorded during the previous week. The central bank also noted that reserve money declined during the week, mainly due to lower deposits held by commercial banks with the central bank. Sri Lanka's tourism sector has surpassed the 950,000 visitor mark for the year despite signs of slower growth during May. According to the latest data released by the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority, the country welcomed 951,742 tourists from January to May 17. However, this reflects a marginal 1% decline compared to the same period last year. The figures indicate that tourism growth momentum has moderated after stronger performance recorded earlier in the year. During the first 17 days of May, Sri Lanka received 75,465 tourists, also showing a slight year-on-year decline of 1%. Arrival numbers continued to slow on a weekly basis throughout the month. More than 33,000 visitors arrived during the first week of May, while the second week recorded just over 29,000 arrivals. Between May 15 and 17, arrivals declined further to 12,608 visitors. Average daily tourist arrivals also eased slightly to 4,439 visitors compared to 4,483 recorded during the same period last year. The highest single-day arrival figure for the month was reported on May 1st when 5,656 tourists entered the country. India remains Sri Lanka's largest tourism source market during the first 17 days of May, contributing more than 32,000 visitors and accounting for 42% of total arrivals during the period. China, the United Kingdom, Australia and Russia were among the other leading source markets. On a year-to-date basis, India has generated more than 221,000 visitors, representing around 23% of total arrivals to Sri Lanka so far this year. The United Kingdom ranked second, followed by Russia. The latest tourism figures also come amid increased industry attention over recent comments made by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi regarding non-essential overseas travel and destination weddings abroad. However, Sri Lanka's tourism industry has largely downplayed concerns over any major impact, citing the island's proximity, affordability, and improved connectivity as key advantage for Indian travelers. The government has announced an additional Rs 2.5 billion fertiliser subsidy package for tea smallholders and growers as rising tensions in the Gulf region continue to affect Sri Lanka's tea industry. According to the Plantation and Community Infrastructure Minister, the decision was taken as an emergency relief measure to ease pressure from rising energy, fertiliser and production costs, along with climate-related disruptions. The minister stated that the government usually produces fertilizer assistance only once a year. However, due to the current global and local challenges, authorities decided to introduce a second round of support to protect export crop production and minimize economic impacts. Under the existing scheme, the annual fertilizer allowance stands at Rs 4,000 with treasury allocations of around 2 billion rupees. Under the newly approved package, growers will receive an additional Rs 5,000 allowance supported by a further treasury allocation of Rs 2.5 billion. The minister also noted that Sri Lanka's tea crop and exports recorded setbacks during the first quarter of 2026 due to adverse weather conditions and continued instability in Middle Eastern countries, which remain key market for Ceylon tea exports. Tea export earnings declined by 5.22% year-on-year to $351.58 million during the first quarter of 2026. In March alone, export revenue fell by more than 17% compared to the same period last year. Nearly 45% of Sri Lanka's annual tea exports are linked to Middle Eastern markets, including Iran, Iraq, UAE and Saudi Arabia, making the industry highly vulnerable to regional instability. Despite these challenges, the minister said there were recent signs of recovery in market conditions. Excess tea crop volumes at the Colombo tea auction had improved, while auction prices also showed a sharp rebound in recent weeks. Official industry data showed that tea production declined by 2.55 million kilograms during the first quarter of the year, while export volumes also recorded a drop compared to 2025. However, export earnings remained relatively stable, supported by higher average FOB prices. The government, meanwhile, said it is preparing contingency plans to address future global economic shocks and climate-related risks, while targeting tea export earnings of $2.5 billion and annual production of 400 million kilograms by 2030. Let's take a look at this week's Treasury-bill auction results. With the recent Treasury-bill auction, the 91-day T-bill rate stands at 8.18%, up by 5 basis points. The 182-day T-bill rate stands at 8.25%, up by 2 basis points, and the 1-year T-bill rate stands at 8.49%, showing no change compared to the previous week. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week.